Elias Ward had grown used to silence. Out on the edge of the frontier, the wind did most of the talking. It hissed across the dry grass, rattled the shutters on the weather-beaten cabin, and filled the spaces where voices used to live. Since his father passed, the ranch felt too large, too empty, and Elias worked sunup to sundown just to keep from drowning in the stillness. He thought he'd long made peace with the morning he saw movement by the corn shed. A shadow, big, graceful, wrong for a coyote, too tall for a lost traveler. Elias froze, tools still in hand, heartbeat sharp in his ears. For a moment he wondered if loneliness had finally driven him to imagining things. But then he saw her clearly. A woman towering, powerful, wrapped in worn buckskin and dust. Her face marked with paint, her eyes fierce and alert. She moved like a panther, every step silent, precise. And in her arms, she carried sacks from his storage as if they weighed nothing. Elias didn't reach for his rifle. Something in the set of her shoulders, in the exhaustion etched into her posture, stopped him. She wasn't raiding, she was surviving. "Water's in the barrel," he said quietly, shocking even himself. His voice sounded foreign in his throat. "If you need more..." The woman spun, ready to fight, muscles coiled like braided steel. But she didn't attack. Instead, she studied him, suspicion burning bright. A long breath passed. The morning wind tugged at her braids. "I will go," she said at last, her voice low and guarded, like she hadn't used it in days. "I take only what I must." "You can take what you need," Elias replied. "No one's counting here." Why did he say it? He didn't know. Maybe because her eyes held a loneliness deeper than his own. Maybe because danger had never looked so human before. She hesitated, then nodded once reluctant gratitude, stiff as a drawn bow. And then she was gone, disappearing into the scrubland, like smoke carried by wind. Elias exhaled. The ranch felt different, no longer a tomb of quiet. Something had entered his life without asking permission, and he had let it. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he knew one thing: the silence would never feel the same again. Elias did not sleep that night. Not truly. He lay in bed, listening to the breeze scrape across the windows, thinking of the stranger with paint on her face and fire in her eyes. Something about her presence clung to him like desert heat, impossible to shake. He had lived alone for so long. Every day a mirror of the last. And then she appeared, silent, fierce, desperate. A storm wearing human skin. Come sunrise, he stepped outside with a rifle slung over his shoulder knot, from fear of her return, but fear of what might be chasing her. Tracks cut through the dust near the shed. Long strides, deep impressions. Whoever she was, she'd moved quickly, and not lightly. He followed them only a short way. The horizon swallowed them like a secret. A knot twisted in his stomach. People who ran that hard weren't simply hungry. They were hunted or haunted, and the frontier made little difference between the two. By midday he tried to work, forcing his hands into familiar routines: water the horses, check the fences, stack the hay. But the chores felt hollow, like he was pretending to live. Every sound in the distance raised his head. Every gust felt like footsteps. As the sun bled toward evening, Elias saw smoke near the far ridge, thin but sharp against the sky. A campfire, too close to his land to ignore, too intentional to be harmless. Travelers rarely lit open fires here, only those certain they feared no one would. Instinct whispered danger. Something inside him whispered her. Against all better judgment, Elias saddled his mare and began riding. The air cooled as shadows stretched long, the land shifting to a burnished orange. Coyotes called in the distance, thin and hungry. The world felt tense, as if holding its breath. Soon he saw them 3 horses tied to a mesquite, and voices, harsh, clipped, foreign but familiar enough to guess their origin. Warriors, men, hardened by blood and expectation. Elias stopped his horse and listened, heart hammering. "The woman," one said, "she will be found. She is bound to us." Elias's jaw clenched. So they were looking for her. His stranger, the one who vanished before sunrise. A fugitive, a rebel, or simply someone who refused to break. He did not know which truth was hers, but he knew now she was not safe. And neither was he. He turned his horse, heading home fast, dust rising behind him like smoke from a fuse. Because if they were close, she might come back, and he would be ready. By the time Elias reached the ranch, dusk had settled like a blanket across the plains. The sky burned red at the edges, fading into violet, then into the deep chill of approaching night. He dismounted fast, boots hitting dirt before the mare fully stopped. His pulse still ran wild. Those riders weren't passing travelers. They were hunting with purpose, and that purpose wore war paint and desperation. He lit no lanterns inside. Darkness was safer lest to betray him, less to betray her if she returned. Still, he checked the rifle twice. Then once more, fingers trembling not from fear, but from certainty. Trouble was no longer a distant rumor. It was breathing somewhere beyond the hills. A quiet knock came at the back door. Elias froze, instinct tugging at his spine, soft, hesitant, not the knock of a man who believed he owned the night. He unlatched the door slowly. She stood there, dusty, exhausted, but unbroken. Taller than he remembered in the fading light, shoulders squared, though her breath trembled. His stranger, the one who'd moved like a silent storm. "You should not have followed my trail," she murmured, voice low, as if the darkness itself might overhear. "They are coming." "I saw them," Elias answered. 3 riders. "They're close." Her jaw tightened. "They will not stop until I am taken." He could ask why. Ask who she was, what chain she'd broken, what oath she'd refused. But he saw the bruises along her arms, the bruised sky in her eyes, the quiet, brutal weight of someone who had already survived too much to ever bow again. Instead, he stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated, pride, suspicion, instinct, all clawing at her posture. Then she crossed the threshold, moving like a creature who knew every step might be her last. Elias shut the door behind her, and the room felt smaller, charged with something fierce and unspoken. "You offered kindness once," she said, barely above a whisper. "I feared it was trick. Now I fear I need it." Her admission struck deeper than any threat outside the walls. "We can think better with food," Elias said, motioning to the table. "You look like you haven't rested in days." She lowered herself slowly, like a warrior, unused to the luxury of chairs. For a moment, silence settled between them, heavy but not empty. Outside, coyotes called again, their voices sharp and lonely across the plains. "What is your name?" Elias asked quietly. She studied him, weighing trust like a blade. Then, finally, he nodded. Elias. 2 names, barely breathed, but enough to change the shape of the night. And outside, somewhere in the dark, hooves struck earth. The hunt was getting closer. Night pressed against the cabin like a living thing, heavy and watchful. Kiona sat near the hearth. Though no fire burned, light meant risk, and risk meant death. Elias moved quietly, setting bread and dried meat on the table. trying not to glance at the window every few heartbeats. The horses outside shifted restlessly, picking up danger long before human ears ever could. Kiona ate slowly, not out of caution, but exhaustion. Each bite looked like it cost her strength she barely had left to spend. Her hands shook only once, but even that tremor felt like thunder from someone carved out of steel and endurance. "You did not have to take me in," she said finally. Her voice was quieter, now less guarded, more human. "Most men would offer bullets instead of shelter." "Most men don't see what I saw," Elias answered, leaning against the edge of the table. Someone running from chains, not looking to put others in them. Kiona's eyes lifted, sharp but softened by a flicker of something like gratitude. "Chains take many shapes," she murmured. "Some are iron, some are promises spoken by others on your behalf." He didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. "Those men outside," Elias asked carefully, "they want to force you back." "Not want, expect." Her expression hardened. "They believe a woman must belong to tribe or husband, to bloodline or duty. They believe my path is theirs to command, and you don't." Kiona shook her head. "I would rather walk through every desert on this earth than bend again." Silence stretched between them. Not empty charged, electric with the truth she'd finally spoken aloud. Elias felt a strange, burning mixture of anger and respect. She wasn't just running. She was choosing freedom, even if the world chose to punish her for it. A sudden sound outside, brush snapping beneath hooves, jerked both their heads up. Elias moved instinctively, hand on his rifle. Kiona stood too, though fatigue still weighed her limbs. "It's them," she whispered. Elias blew out a slow breath. "They won't find you here." Kiona's gaze hardened. "They will search. They know I am near." "These men," she hesitated, as if the truth tasted bitter. "They do not fear law, only shame." A chill crawled up his spine. These weren't pursuers acting from duty, they were men trying to reclaim power, and they would bleed the land dry to get it back. Elias reached into the corner cabinet, brought out a second rifle, set it gently on the table. "You're not alone now," he said simply. Kiona stared at the weapon, then at him. For a moment, the fierce warrior faded, replaced by a woman who had carried her world alone for too long. "You do not know the storm you invite," she said. Elias nodded. "Maybe so. But storms break eventually. Chains don't unless someone helps." The coyotes went silent outside. A sign every rancher knew. Redditors approached. Kiona reached for the rifle. The night held its breath. The world outside the cabin shifted quiet, in a way no peaceful night ever was. Elias could feel it in his bones, in the way the floorboards seemed to hold their breath beneath his boots. Danger had weight, and it pressed against the walls like an unseen hand. Kiona checked the rifle with practiced movement. Even exhausted, her fingers were steady now. Strength gathered in her posture, quiet but undeniable. She was born to fight. But she looked like someone who never wanted to, again unless forced. "Listen," she murmured, closing her eyes briefly. "3 horses. Same men you saw. They searched the ridge. You can tell that without looking." "I spent years learning the language of earth and air," she replied. "A warrior must hear what others ignore." Elias didn't respond. Instead, he moved to the shutter, just enough to look without showing light. Moonlight dusted the dry grass outside. Then he saw movement, faint shadows crossing the low ridge, heading toward the barn. He leaned back, voice barely a breath. "They're here." Kiona lowered into a crouch, every line of her body tightening. Yet there was no panic in her, only readiness. Elias wished he could borrow even a fraction of it. "Do not fire unless you must," she said quietly. "Blood spills fast. War comes faster." "I don't want war," Elias whispered. "No one ever does," she answered. "It arrives anyway." Hoofbeats slowed. Voices traveled on the wind now, low and sharp. Elias distinguished fragments. Tracks. She can't be far. Honor must be restored. Honor. The word curdled in his gut. Honor used as rope, as cage, as blade. Kyona's jaw clenched. "They speak as though I am livestock returned to corral." "You're nobody's property," Elias said, heat threading through his voice. Kyona looked at him, not surprised, but searching, as though trying to understand. How a man alone in a quiet world had chosen to defy the path others expected of him. "You protect someone you owe nothing to," she murmured. "Your people do not usually act so." Elias gave a thin, wry smile. "Maybe I'm not much like my people." For the first time since she'd arrived, her expression softened. Not completely like a stone, catching the first warmth of dawn, but enough to show there was something breakable beneath all the armor. The barn door groaned. Elias and Kyona went still. Someone was inside. Wood scraped, followed by a curse hushed in frustration. Then footsteps crunched gravel near the fence line. "They will circle to the house," she whispered. "They always search the heart last." "The heart. The place where life breathes," she clarified. Elias swallowed. He understood too well. His home wasn't just wood, it was memory and grief, and now, her. Kyona lifted her rifle. "If I leave now, they will follow only me." "You're not walking out that door," Elias said. "You cannot stand between men and their pride," she replied softly. "Pride kills more than steel." Wind swept across the plains with a restless hum, as if the land sensed change gathering on its horizon. The morning carried no calm, only the sharp quiet of animals aware of danger. Elias and Kyona stood in the yard, not speaking at first. Silence did more than words now. They had crossed from caution into preparation, and there was no turning back. Elias handed her a rifle, his movements slow, deliberate. "Balance your stance," he murmured. It wasn't command. It was trust extended in the shape of advice. Kyona nodded, adjusting her footing, eyes narrowed with focus. She had fought before, but not like this, not defending hope, and not beside someone who offered choice instead of command. The first shot cracked through the prairie, scattering birds. Kyona held steady. Elias watched, not judging, only learning who she was in motion. She lowered the rifle, exhaling. "This weapon speaks different than mine," she said. "Speaks loud enough," Elias replied. A faint smile touched her lips, brief, unguarded, then vanished like dust on wind. They worked without rush, strengthening fences, securing gates, checking ropes and hinges. The earth crunched under boots. Each task became a vow in silence. We stay. We face what comes, together. At the barn, she paused, hand resting on weathered wood. "I lived by rules, not mine," she said softly. "Obey, serve, follow tradition." Strength was obedience. "And now?" Elias asked. "Strength is choosing." She met his gaze. There was no drama in her voice, only the clarity of someone who had bled for truth. Inside the cabin, they spread tools and ammunition across the table. Lantern light flickered across their faces, shadows dancing like restless spirits. Elias mapped escape routes, safe angles to fire from, the blind spots near the barn. She studied everything, absorbing silently. "You've guarded this place alone a long time," she said. "Not anymore," he answered. Outside, coyotes cried, sharp and lonely. She stepped to the window, scanning the darkening horizon. They do not give up. They believe control is sacred. "And what do you believe?" Elias asked. "That freedom is worth every battle." Her hand brushed the wooden frame, steady, unshaken. "Even if it breaks me." Elias nodded, feeling the weight of her conviction settle inside him like a flame catching kindling. They stood in the gathering dusk, two souls molded by solitude, now bound by shared defiance. The wind shifted. Horses moved uneasily. Somewhere far off, a drumbeat rhythm hooves, or perhaps only fear imagining them, echoed faintly. Kyona's voice came quiet, steady. "Night will test us." Elias gripped his rifle. "Then we stand through it." And the final light of day sank beneath the land, taking peace with it. Night stretched across the ranch like a dark cloak. Lanterns glowed low. Fire crackled with controlled warmth. Inside the cabin, the world felt smaller but fortified. A temporary sanctuary, built by determination, not walls. Kyona sat near the hearth, sharpening a hunting knife. Sparks danced off steel, rhythm steady, matching her heartbeat. Elias finished checking ammunition, then sealed the last shutter, pausing to listen. Wind whistled, but beneath it, something else. A tension humming through the bones of the land. "You ever face a fight knowing it will change you?" Elias asked quietly. Kyona lifted her gaze, eyes reflecting firelight. "Change comes whether we choose or not. This time, I choose." Her voice held no tremor. She had already survived enough to know fear without bowing to it. He sat across from her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The crackling fire, the soft shifting of the house in cooling night, the distant rustle of grass all wove into a fragile calm. "They will not see sense," she murmured. "To them, I am obligation, duty, property wrapped in honor." Her tone carried no bitterness, only fact etched by history. "You're not property," Elias said. "I know." She slid the blade back into its sheath. "But they don't." Outside, a lone wolf howled, long and mournful. Elias stood, scanning through a narrow crack in the shutter. Nothing yet, but the plains breathed with anticipation. Even the stars seemed sharper, as if watching. Kyona rose, walked to the table, and set her hand on a coil of rope. "I was taken from freedom once," she said. "Never again." "You're not alone now," Elias said. His voice held more steel than before. Their eyes met. Not a promise. Not a vow. Something quieter, stronger, recognition. Two lives bruised by solitude finding strength side by side. Time passed like a tightening wire. They checked every corner of the room again, then stepped outside. The night hit cold and alive. Coyotes fell silent, a sign more chilling than noise. Horses shifted nervously, hooves tapping earth. Kyona tilted her head, listening. "Wind carries their trail," she whispered. "They are near. Not here yet, but on their way." Elias steadied his rifle, breath slow. She lifted her bow, posture calm as moonlit stone. "We see the dawn," he said, not as a wish, but a declaration. "We earn it," she replied. The wind rose, stirring dust like ghost breath. Far off, faint as memory hoofbeats. Real this time. Together, they stepped forward. Silhouettes carved against night, waiting for whatever approached. Alone once, but never again. The plains held its breath, and the storm began to gather. Dawn broke with a muted glow, as if even the sun approached the day cautiously. Elias woke before light touched the windows, ears tuned to every sound outside. The horses shifted restlessly, and the wind scraped across the barn roof like warning whispers. Nothing visible yet, but unease walked the land. Kiona moved silently beside him, already awake, already ready. She tied her hair back with steady hands and stepped onto the porch. The prairie stretched endless and pale, grass stirring like nervous breath. She lifted her chin, inhaling the air. "They move," she murmured. "Far, but closer than yesterday." Elias didn't ask how she sensed it. He had learned that some knowledge does not come from sight. It comes from survival, etched into bone. He saddled the horses, though he did not plan to ride. Preparation was armor. Habit brought calm. They walked the perimeter together, scanning horizon lines where dawn met land in a thin gold blade. "They'll test the edges first," Kiona said. "Look for weakness." "We have none," Elias answered, though doubt scraped at him. Not in her, in himself. Duty felt heavier when shared. Inside the barn, Kiona examined weapons. She moved with discipline, not rush, warrior stillness honed by hardship. Elias watched, admiring the quiet strength in her posture. "Trouble once carved me small," she said without looking up. "I learned to carve back." He nodded. "We'll face them together." They tended the animals, brushed dust from coats, fed them calmly. Even this act felt sacred, life cared for when death lurked near. Later, they stood on the ridge overlooking the plains. Wind carried a new scent, smoke, faint but real. A signal someone camped, someone waiting. Elias clenched his jaw. "They're close." "They test patience," Kiona replied. "Perhaps, hoping fear makes us run. And if we don't, then they learn fear is not only theirs to give." When midday came, the ranch fell into uneasy stillness. Sounds felt sharper. Shadows stretched long. Elias hammered a loose board near the corral. Kiona gathered water, her eyes always scanning. Every task felt final, like last ritual before storm. They ate little. Bread, dried meat. Kiona chewed slowly, gaze distant. "Where I come from, storms decide who listens, who kneels, who rises. And which are we?" Elias asked. She looked at him weary, fierce. "We rise." A hawk circled overhead, spiraling lower, wings catching sun. Kiona watched it. Even the sky prepares. Elias felt heat in his chest, not fear, but readiness. Hard-forged courage. The kind to lonely souls found in each other. Near sundown, a rumble trembled through the earth, distant hooves or distant thunder. Impossible to tell. But one thing was certain. The waiting was ending. Kiona rested her hand on the doorframe. Night comes with judgment. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle. Let it come. And the sun lowered into a red horizon, like blood slipping beneath the world. Evening crawled across the plains, heavy and thick, like a hand pressing the land into silence. Lanterns burned low inside the cabin, but most light came from the sinking sun, a long crimson smear across the sky. Elias felt its weight as if the sky said farewell. Kiona sat at the table, sharpening her blade with slow, even strokes. The rhythm was calm, but her eyes burned with readiness. Elias oiled his rifle, movements steady despite the tightness in his throat. "You fear?" she asked softly. "Only losing what matters," he answered. "Fear isn't weakness. It's warning." She nodded. "Fear taught me to run. Now it teaches me to stand." A gust rattled the window. Elias crossed to check shutters again. No cracks, no light leaking. Sealed tight, prepared, yet his pulse beat like a drum in dark hallways of his chest. Kiona rose, moving to the doorway. "When I escaped them," she said quietly, "I didn't know where freedom lived. Now I do." "You found a place," Elias said. "I found a choice," she corrected. "Place without choice is another cage." Outside, coyotes cried and fell abruptly silent, as if silenced by something larger. A sign, a promise. Elias felt hair rise on his arms. Kiona stepped into the yard, bow in hand, scanning shadows. Night air clung to skin, its chill sharp as blade. Elias followed, boots crunching gravel. The ranch breathed in low tension. "You think they'll wait until deep night?" Elias whispered. "They wait for fear to soften the spine," she answered. "But some spines do not bend." A faint tremor rolled beneath their feet, not imagined hooves, distant, but sure, coming with certainty. They stood side by side, silhouettes against moon's first cold light. Neither moved. The land seemed to settle around them, like a ring drawn for battle. "You once stood alone," Elias murmured. "So did you," she replied. "Now we do not." A small fire burned in a metal trough nearby, crackling softly. Sparks floated like brief stars before dying in the wind. Kiona's face glowed in orange light, strong, resolute, unclaimed by anyone's authority. "If dawn comes," she whispered, "it will come because we forced it." "No one is taking you back," Elias said. "No one ever will." The hooves grew louder, rhythm slow, purposeful. Approaching like fate, learning patience. Horses in the barn stirred, stamping uneasily. Elias raised his rifle. Kiona drew her bow. They stood without flinch or plea. Two figures carved in stubborn defiance beneath a swelling night. And as darkness deepened, the riders closed in, shadows on the edge of sight. Judgment had found them. Night burst open with thunder that wasn't from the sky, it came from hooves. War cries and pounding hearts. The riders emerged from the darkness like shadows born from hate. Torches burning against the star-cold night. Elias and Kiona were already outside, weapons raised, bodies braced. The first arrow hissed past Elias, splitting wood behind him. He fired in controlled rhythm, not panic. Not rage, just resolve, sharpened by love and duty. Kiona moved beside him, bow drawn, releasing arrows with precision born from years of survival. She did not tremble. She did not doubt. Torches hit the ground, flames catching in dry brush. Smoke curled upward like warning spirits. Horses screamed. Men shouted. The ranch, once quiet refuge, became battleground. A rider charged. Elias stepped forward, firing. The man fell, rolled, rose again, but Kiona's arrow ended his advance. Her face carried no triumph, only purpose. "They test us," she said breathlessly. "They learn us," Elias replied. More shadows circled. Drums of hooves echoed like fate pounding a door. One warrior called out in their tongue. Kiona stiffened. Command, claim, demand of surrender. She answered with silence, then with an arrow through the torch in his hand. Flame died. His voice faltered. She had declared her freedom with action, not words. They moved toward the barn, taking cover behind stacked lumber. Elias reloaded, hands firm despite the chaos. Kiona crouched, breathing steady. They will push harder now. Let them. A warrior on foot rushed close. Elias swung the rifle like a club, knocking him down. But another grabbed Kiona's arm. She twisted, drove her knee into his ribs, and cut through rope he tried to throw around her wrists. Rope fell like dead snakeskin. "I am not bound," she said, voice low and final. Fire crackled along the fence line, flames spreading where torches fell. Smoke bit the air. Elias coughed, eyes stinging. "We fall back to the cabin." She nodded, covering him as they moved. Arrows clattered against walls. Bullets tore dirt near their feet. The cabin door slammed shut behind them, wood shaking under impact. Inside, lantern shook on its hook. Elias backed against table, chest heaving. Kiona pressed shoulder to door, breathing through smoke-tinged air. Outside, shouts rose like storm waves. "They think we are cornered," Elias said, voice rough. Kiona touched the wall, steady, calm even now. "Corner does not break us. It focuses us." Outside, war drums of footsteps approached the porch. Torches flared through windows. They were moments from breach. Kiona looked at Elias, eyes clear. "Whatever happens, I do not return to chains." "You won't," he said. "Not while I breathe." Their hands met, not in panic, but promise. The door shuddered, and battle pressed closer. The door burst inward with splintering force. Men stormed through, firelight casting wild shadows. Elias fired first, sound shaking the room. Kiona moved with fast grace, blade flashing. Shouts filled the cabin like thunder in tight walls. A warrior lunged. She blocked, spun, struck. Elias grappled another, slamming him into table edge. Lamps rattled. Heat from burning brush seeped through seams of the walls. Smoke crept low along floorboards. "Push them back." Elias shouted. Kiona's eyes sharpened. "Push them out." She kicked the doorframe, forcing space, then drove attackers toward night instead of letting them flood inside. Elias followed, firing controlled shots. 2 warriors fell. Others backed, regrouping in firelit yard. The ranch crackled with spreading flame. Sparks danced in wind like frantic stars. Horses cried from barn. Kiona saw heart twisting. She had run from captivity once. She would not let innocent creatures burn. "Barn," she said. Elias blinked. "Will be open ground. They burn trapped." "I once was trapped." That alone was reason. They sprinted through smoke. Arrows chased them. Heat licked skin. Elias burst barn door open. Horses bolted into night. Kiona cut the last rope, freeing a trembling mare. "Run," she whispered, voice nearly prayer. A shout rose behind them, warriors closing. Elias turned, rifle raised. Kiona took position at his side. Enemies charged again. This time, they stood not as hunted, but as fire-forged defenders of chosen life. Clash arrows, gunfire, dust and flame swirling. Kiona's blade struck true. Elias' shots held line. One warrior reached for her arm, eyes burning with righteous claim. She met his gaze unbroken. "I choose my life," she said, and ended his reach forever. Silence followed, stunned, heavy. Remaining warriors wavered. Moonlight glinted on their hesitation. Tradition cracked under the weight of her defiance. She had become story, and story frightened those who relied on obedience. Their leader finally spoke, not command, but warning. Hollow and defeated, "You leave our world." Kiona lifted her chin. "I left when you chose chains over hearts." He retreated. Others followed. Hooves faded into open land. Smoke thinned. Fire hissed where Elias threw water. Slowly, the ranch exhaled. Dawn lifted pale light across scorched earth. Elias leaned on porch rail, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. Kiona stood beside him, wind moving through her hair like blessing. "You're free," he said softly. "I am chosen," she corrected. freedom means nothing without choosing where to stand. They looked over burned grass, broken boards, scars earned, not feared. Hard, but theirs. What now? Elias asked. We rebuild, she said. And we live not from fear, but from belonging. He nodded, heart steady. The plains stretched endless ahead, no threat now. Only horizon, waiting for those who dared claim it. The wind carried a dry whisper across the valley, brushing through the tall grass like fingers over old memories. 3 years had passed since Callum Reed last spoke to another soul. His small cabin stood alone against the vastness of the land, wood-weathered gray. The roof sagging slightly, smoke rising thin from the chimney like a sigh. Every morning began the same. The creak of the door. The smell of earth. The silence. Callum worked the soil with quiet hands. Not because he needed the harvest, but because it gave his days shape. The world had taken too much from him. Noise, people, expectations. Out here, he had learned to live with only the sound of his breath and the song of distant coyotes. But lately, the silence had changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt watched. At first, it was small things, a faint track near the riverbed, a shadow by the ridge at dusk. Callum told himself it was nothing. Deer, maybe, or imagination. But then he found footprints, light, deliberate, not from any boots he knew, barefoot, human. That night, he couldn't sleep. The cabin walls felt thinner than before. The moonlight fell across the floorboards, silver and cold. He kept the rifle by his chair, not out of fear, but out of habit, the kind that settles into a man who's lost too much. Days passed. Then, one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he saw her. She stood by the old fence, still as stone, wrapped in a blanket the color of clay and fire. The wind caught her hair dark, heavy, braided with small feathers. Her eyes met his across the distance, calm yet piercing, like she already knew who he was before he spoke a word. He didn't move. Neither did she. When she finally stepped forward, her voice carried softly, but with purpose. "You are Callum Reed," she said, more statement than question. He nodded. Words felt too heavy in his mouth. "I have been watching you," she continued, not with guilt, but conviction. "I needed to be certain." "Certain of what?" Callum asked, his voice rough from disuse. "That you are the man I'm looking for." He didn't know what to say. In 3 years of solitude, no one had come for him, not for help, not for conversation, and certainly not with the kind of calm certainty this woman carried. She stepped closer, her gaze never faltering. "My name is Kiona," she said, "and I have a request that might change both our lives." The evening wind fell still. The valley held its breath, and for the first time in years, Callum felt the strange pulse of something he thought he had buried long ago. Curiosity and fear. Night came early that day, heavy with the scent of dust and cedar smoke. Callum sat by the small fire outside his cabin, the orange glow dancing over his weathered face. Across from him, Kiona knelt in silence, her features carved in flickering light, proud, calm, and unyielding. Between them, the air seemed to hum with something unsaid. She had arrived as the sun died behind the hills. She did not ask for food or shelter. She simply followed him to the fire and waited. Callum wasn't used to company, but there was something about her stillness that made words feel unnecessary. Finally, she spoke. "I belong to the Apache," she said quietly. "My people live beyond those ridges, where the land still remembers our stories." Her eyes lifted to the horizon, where night swallowed the last line of red. "But our stories are fading. Our children fewer each year. The elders say we are losing more than blood. We are losing memory. Callum listened, unsure why she was telling him this. Her voice was steady, yet underneath it lay a tremor, not weakness, but urgency. My people chose a man for me, she continued. Strong, respected. But his strength is of the body only. He does not listen. He does not honor the quiet. I told them I would not take him. Callum's brow furrowed. You came all this way to tell me that. She met his eyes. No, I came to ask you for something greater. The fire cracked. A spark rose, caught the wind, and vanished. I want a child, she said, her tone as calm as if she were asking for water. A child who will carry our stories, but with the heart of someone who understands silence, respect, and kindness. I have watched you, Callum Reed. You have those things. For a long time, there was only the sound of the wind moving through the dry grass. Callum couldn't speak. Her words felt like they didn't belong in his world. Not after everything he had buried here. You don't know me, he said finally. I know enough, she replied. You lost something that made you leave the world. But you did not let it turn you cruel. That is rare. Her gaze was unwavering, but not forceful. It was the kind of look that saw beyond fear. Callum turned away, staring into the fire. Memories flickered with the flames, his wife's laughter, the child they never had, the grave he left behind. He clenched his hands, as if to hold on to the moment before it slipped into pain. You should go back to your people, he said quietly. I can't give you what you want. Kiona stood, the firelight outlining her silhouette. You already have, she said softly. You gave me an answer, one born of fear, not truth. Then she turned toward the dark, her figure dissolving into the night. Callum remained by the fire long after she disappeared, listening to the wind whisper her name through the valley, Kiona. The next morning came slow and gray. A thin fog clung to the valley, and the smell of wet ash lingered around the cabin. Callum moved quietly through his chores, trying to chase away the weight of the night before, her words, her request. The way she'd looked at him with a certainty he couldn't understand. But when he turned toward the fence line, she was there again. Kiona stood in the mist, calm and steady, as if she had never left. Her blanket hung damp around her shoulders, her eyes bright against the dull light of morning. You came back, Callum said, his voice rough. I said I would. He hesitated. If you think I'm going to change my mind. I didn't come to change it, she interrupted gently. I came to explain it. They stood in silence for a long moment, the fog curling between them. Then Kiona reached into the pouch at her side and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. She placed it carefully on the old table outside the cabin and opened it. Inside lay a carved wooden figure, a child. Simple and unpainted, but worn smooth by time. Callum looked down at it, unsure what to say. My grandmother made this, Kiona said softly. It was passed from mother to daughter for generations. It represents the spirit of continuity, of the next voice that carries our songs forward. She touched the figure gently, as if it might crumble. But now, there are no daughters left to pass it to. My sister is gone. My cousins married men who left the old ways behind. Our language is spoken less each year. Soon it will be silent. Her words struck something in him, the echo of loss, of things that fade when no one is left to remember. She looked up at him, her eyes unwavering. I don't want a child only for myself. I want to keep alive what the world keeps trying to bury. I want to give the land another story. Callum swallowed hard. And you think, I can do that? I don't think, she said. I feel. The earth brought me here. I followed its signs. Every night, I dreamed of a man who lived in silence, but whose heart still spoke. When I found you, I knew. He turned away, jaw clenched. Dreams don't mean anything. Kiona smiled faintly. Then why are you afraid of them? Her question hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to argue, to retreat into the safety of isolation. But her calm stripped away every defense he had. I'm not the man you think I am, he said quietly. I'm broken. Kiona stepped closer, her voice soft but unwavering. Then maybe that's what makes you right. Broken things remember what others forget, how to rebuild. The fog began to lift, revealing the land bathed in pale light. She picked up the wooden figure and pressed it into his hand. Keep it until you know what to do with it. He stared at the carving, feeling its smooth edges, its history carved by countless hands. It felt warm, alive, like something that had waited centuries for him to hold it. When he looked up, she was already walking away toward the ridge. Morning light spilled over the valley like melted gold. Callum woke to the sound of crows circling above the fields, their calls sharp against the still air. The fire from the night before had long turned to ash, and so had the strange calm he'd forced upon himself. He tried to lose himself in routine, hauling water, checking the fence line, tending the small garden that barely grew anything worth keeping. But every sound, every shadow, reminded him of her. The shape she made against the dying sun, the way her eyes didn't waver when she spoke of a child, his child. By midday, the unease had become unbearable. He found himself staring toward the ridges, wondering if she'd gone for good. Part of him hoped so. Another part, the quieter, stubborn part he'd tried to silence for years, wished she'd return. When he saw her again, it was like the land had exhaled. She stood at the edge of his field, sunlight flashing against the beads in her hair. She carried no bag, no weapon, only a small pouch of herbs and a calm that seemed older than time. I thought you'd left, he said. His voice caught between relief and annoyance. I did, Kiona replied, but the wind brought me back. She stepped closer, the dry grass bending under her feet. I spoke with the elders before I came here. They think I've lost my way, that no good can come from this choice. But I see things differently. Sometimes the right path is the one no one understands. Callum studied her. You believe you're meant to have a child with a stranger. She smiled faintly. Not a stranger. A man who lives with the earth the way my people once did. You respect what others waste. You listen when no one else does. He shook his head. You don't know what you're asking for. I do, she said, her tone firm. I'm not asking for love or promises. Only truth. Only that you don't hide behind your grief any longer. The words cut deeper than she intended. Callum turned away, jaw tight, the horizon blurring before him. You think you understand my grief. You know nothing about it. Kiona didn't move. Then tell me. He said nothing. The silence between them stretched until the wind rose again, carrying the smell of rain from the mountains. Finally, he spoke, voice low, as if confessing to the land itself. I had a family once, a wife. She died before we could have children. After that, the world became too loud, so I left it. Kiona's expression softened, her voice barely above a whisper. You left, but your heart stayed. Callum looked up at her, something shifting in his eyes, not anger, but exhaustion. The kind that comes from running too long from the truth. She stepped closer, placing her pouch in his hand. Inside were small seeds. For the field, she said. Plant them. Watch them grow. Let that be your answer. Then she turned and walked away again, leaving Callum standing in the open field, the seeds pressing into his palm, light, fragile, but somehow heavier than anything he'd ever carried. That night, Callum couldn't shake the memory of her words. The small wooden figure lay on the table beside his bed, its presence heavy as a heartbeat. He turned it over in his hand again and again, tracing the grooves worn by generations. Each touch carried a strange warmth, as if it were breathing with him. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it brought dreams, not of the past, but of the land itself. He saw roots stretching beneath the valley, thick, twisting veins of light that pulsed with a rhythm older than the mountains. From the earth rose a voice, soft and low, whispering words he didn't understand. But one feeling was clear: grow. When Callum woke before dawn, the world felt changed. The air was sharp, electric. The fog had lifted, leaving the valley drenched in silver dew. He stepped outside barefoot, the cold ground biting at his feet, and looked toward the ridge where Kiona had vanished. Something pulled him, not reason, not fear, but instinct. He gathered a shovel and a small bag of seeds she had left behind. The earth was still damp from the night's chill, but he began to dig, slow and deliberate. For every seed he placed into the soil, he felt a pulse in his chest, as if the land itself were breathing with him. By midday, his hands were raw, his back aching, but he didn't stop. It wasn't work, it was release. For the first time in years, the silence didn't crush him. It carried him. As the sun began to fall, a figure appeared at the far end of the field. She watched him from a distance, arms folded, a faint smile playing on her lips. When he looked up, she walked toward him, the wind tugging gently at her braids. "You planted them," she said softly. He nodded, didn't want them to go to waste. "They won't," she replied. "Things planted with truth always find their way to the light." He studied her for a long moment, then asked, "Why me, really?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "Because you've known loss and didn't let it turn you to stone. Because you still care, even when it hurts. The land needs hands like yours." Her words sank deep, stirring something inside him that had long been dormant. "I don't know if I can be what you need," he admitted. "I don't need you to be anything," she said. "Just be here. That's enough." They stood together in the fading light, neither speaking. The valley around them hummed softly, the kind of quiet that feels alive. And in that stillness, something unspoken passed between them, fragile but undeniable. When darkness fell, Kiona turned toward the hills. "I'll come again," she said. Callum nodded. "You always do." She paused, glancing back at him. "When the first sprout breaks the soil, your answer will come with it." And then she was gone. That night, Callum sat by the window, staring out at the field. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying her scent. Her words, her calm defiance. Days passed in uneasy rhythm. The seeds Kiona had given him lay buried beneath the soil, hidden but alive. Callum found himself tending to them each morning, not out of obligation, but out of something quieter, a fragile hope he didn't dare name. Kiona returned often now. Sometimes she brought herbs, sometimes silence. She never asked again about the child, nor pressed him for answers. Instead, she worked beside him, repairing the old fence, collecting wood, speaking softly to the earth in her own tongue. The valley began to change. Where there had once been dry dust, now green began to bloom. Small shoots, stubborn and bright, pushed through the soil like whispers of renewal. Callum noticed the air felt different too, warmer, fuller. He could hear the river more clearly, the hum of bees, the laughter of wind through the reeds. It was as if life itself had decided to return, following her. One evening, as the sun dipped low and gold light spilled across the fields, Kiona stood beside him, watching the first sprouts move in the breeze. "You planted them well," she said softly. "I just followed what you told me." "No," she smiled, turning to him. "The earth doesn't answer to words. It answers to intent. It felt your care." Callum wanted to reply, but the weight in his chest made it hard to breathe. There was something about her presence, steady, grounding, that reminded him of what he'd forgotten. The comfort of being understood without having to speak. He looked at her hands, rough from work but graceful in movement. "You don't seem afraid," he said quietly. Kiona tilted her head. "Afraid of what?" "Of me, of being here." She smiled again, this time with a flicker of sadness. "You mistake stillness for fearlessness." "I am afraid, Callum. But fear doesn't guide me. It only reminds me that what I'm doing matters." Her words lingered between them, carried by the wind like the smell of rain. That night, Callum dreamed for the first time in years. He dreamed of the land breathing, roots stretching beneath the soil, wrapping around the cabin, the hills, and his heart. When he woke before dawn, the sky was a pale gray, and a figure stood at the edge of his property. Not Kiona. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with the quiet intensity of someone used to command. His hair was tied back, and a necklace of carved bone hung around his neck. Callum stepped out onto the porch, the old rifle hanging loose in his hands. The man didn't move. His eyes were sharp, his voice low. "You're the farmer," he said. "The one she talks about." Callum's chest tightened. "And you are." The man's jaw clenched. "The one she was promised to." The valley had never known such stillness. Even the wind seemed to wait. The sound of hooves approached slowly this time, deliberate, measured, carrying the weight of something inevitable. Kiona stood a few paces in front of the cabin, her shoulders straight, her expression calm. But Callum could see the tremor in her hands. She wasn't afraid, she was bracing herself. From the ridge, the rider came into view, Tahu. His horse moved like a shadow. Black and sleek, steam rising from its nostrils in the cold morning air. His presence filled the space around him, pride, anger, tradition carved into every movement. "Kiona of the Fire River," he called out, his voice sharp as a blade. "You dishonor your people." She didn't flinch. "I honor them in my own way." Tao dismounted the ground, crunching beneath his boots. His eyes flicked to Callum, measuring, judging, dismissing. "This is the man you choose. A stranger who hides from the world." Callum said nothing. His instinct told him to avoid conflict, to let the storm pass. But something inside him, something new, kept him rooted to the spot. Kiona stepped closer to Tahu. "He is not what you think. He carries the quiet strength of the earth." Tao laughed harshly. "Strength? You think silence is strength? You think hiding from your own blood is courage?" He turned toward Callum, his tone low and venomous. "Do you even know what she asks of you?" Callum met his gaze for the first time. "I know enough." Tahu's hand twitched toward the knife at his belt. "Then you know this is not your right." Before Callum could speak, Kiona stepped between them. "Stop. This isn't the way." But the air had already changed, sharp, electric. Two worlds were colliding, and neither would walk away untouched. Tahu's voice dropped to a growl. "If he wants to stand in my place, he must prove his worth. Not with words, with courage." He pointed to the edge of the valley, where the river cut deep into the land. "At sunset, one challenge. The land will decide who deserves to carry its legacy." Kiona's eyes flashed. That's not our way anymore, Tahu. It is mine, he snapped. And it always will be. Then he mounted his horse again, turning toward the ridge. At sunset, he repeated, before vanishing into the rising heat. Silence fell once more. Only the steady rhythm of the wind through the grass remained. Callum exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You knew this would happen. Kiona nodded. I knew something would. The old ways don't fade quietly. He looked toward the horizon where Tahu had disappeared. You think I can win? Kiona stepped closer, placing a hand over his chest. It's not about winning. It's about standing. Her touch lingered, grounding him. The land doesn't choose by strength of arm, Callum. It chooses by strength of spirit. He nodded slowly, though doubt still clouded his eyes. I'm not a fighter. The man's name was Tahu. His presence was like a storm, silent before it broke, dangerous when it did. For 2 days he lingered near the edge of Callum's land, saying little, watching everything. Callum tried to keep his distance, but the man's shadow seemed to follow him everywhere. Kiona came on the 3rd morning. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held a quiet grief. He shouldn't have come, she said. I told them I would return when the time was right. Then, why is he here? Callum asked, voice low but steady. To take me back, she replied, and to remind me what happens when a woman defies the council. The air between them turned heavy. Even the birds fell silent. Tahu approached, his footsteps deliberate, crushing the dry grass beneath his boots. He stopped a few feet away, eyes locked on Callum. You think you can take what isn't yours? He said, his tone almost casual, though anger flickered beneath it. Callum didn't move. She came here by choice. Tahu's lip curled. Choice. You think she has choice? Her people gave her purpose. You, he gestured around at the cabin, the barren field. You hide from the world like a wounded animal. Kiona stepped between them before Callum could speak. Enough, she said sharply. This is not about who is stronger. It's about who listens. Tahu turned to her, his jaw set. You shame yourself before an outsider. You shame us all. Her eyes flashed with restrained fury. Then let my shame be mine to bear. The man's hand twitched toward the knife on his belt, but he stopped himself, glancing once more at Callum, measuring him, testing him. Then he spat into the dirt and turned away. This isn't over, he muttered before walking toward the ridge. When he disappeared, silence fell again, thick as smoke. Kiona stood still, breathing hard though she hadn't fought. Callum watched her, the firelight of defiance still burning in her eyes. You didn't have to protect me, he said quietly. I wasn't protecting you, she answered. I was protecting what might still become. Her words sank deep, heavy with meaning he wasn't ready to face. That night, Callum couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as if the land itself were restless. He sat by the dying fire, thinking of everything she had risked, her home, her people, her safety, all for something she still believed in. And what had he done? Hidden. Run watched his life fade with the seasons. When dawn came, he rose and went to the field. The young sprouts were trembling in the morning air, fragile but determined. He knelt beside them and touched the soil, rough and cool beneath his fingers. For the first time, he whispered not to the land, but to himself. I don't want to run anymore. Behind him, Kiona's voice came softly. Then don't. He turned. She stood there in the rising sun, her hair catching the light, her eyes filled with both fear and faith. By the time the sun slid behind the ridge, the valley glowed the color of blood and rust. The river roared louder than usual. swollen by the storm that had passed 2 nights before. Its current was fierce, restless, like the tension between the 2 men who now faced each other on its banks. Tahu stood bare-armed, his chest marked with the ochre symbols of his clan. In his hand, a spear glinted in the fading light. "The river decides," he said. "We cross. The one who reaches the opposite side first and returns. Standing will carry the right to Kiona's promise." Callum stared at the churning water. He had seen men drown in calmer streams. The roar of it drowned out his thoughts, but not his fear. Still, he stepped forward. "If this is what it takes to end it," he said quietly, "so be it." Kiona moved to stop him, but Tahu raised a hand. "Let the land speak." The 2 men waded into the current. The water was icy, biting into their skin, pulling with merciless hands. Tahu pushed ahead quickly, his strength raw and furious. Callum struggled, every step a battle against the pull beneath him. The current tore at his legs, his breath came ragged. But he kept his eyes fixed on the opposite bank. Halfway across, Tahu slipped. For a heartbeat, he disappeared under the surface, the spear torn from his grip. Callum hesitated, instinct screaming at him to keep moving, but something stronger rose inside. Without thinking, he plunged after Tahu, fighting the surge until he caught the other man's arm. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice swallowed by the water. Together, they tumbled, crashing against hidden rocks, until at last, Callum's hand found purchase on a jut of stone. With a final surge, he dragged Tahu toward the shallows. They collapsed on the opposite bank, gasping, coughing up the river's fury. Tahu rolled onto his side, eyes wide with disbelief. "Why?" he rasped. Callum looked at him, breathing hard. "Because I don't fight to take, I fight to keep what's worth saving." For a moment, the world seemed to still. The roar of the water softened, the wind fell quiet, as if the valley itself were listening. Kiona, watching from across the river, sank to her knees. She saw not 2 men, but 2 paths, one chosen by anger, the other by compassion, and how the land tilted gently toward mercy. Tahu rose unsteadily. The pride in his face cracked, giving way to something older, more human. He looked at Callum, then at the water. Perhaps the land has already spoken. He turned and walked downstream, disappearing into the mist that gathered over the river's edge. Callum remained kneeling, the cold pressing through his bones. He lifted his eyes to the far bank. Kiona stood there, tears catching the last light of the day. For a long time, neither moved. Then, slowly, she crossed toward him. The current gentler now, as though the river itself had exhaled. When she reached him, she placed a hand on his cheek. The storm rolled in before dawn, a black wall swallowing the horizon. Wind howled across the valley, carrying dust, rain, and the echo of something darker, the sound of hooves. Callum stepped out of the cabin, the rifle hanging at his side. He didn't need to see to know who was coming. To who? Kiona stood behind him, wrapped in her blanket, her eyes calm but unyielding. "He won't stop," she said. "He believes strength must always win." Callum glanced at her. Then let him see another kind of strength. Thunder cracked. The rain came hard, drumming on the roof, soaking the ground until it turned to mud. Through the sheets of water, Tahu emerged, riding down the hill like a shadow pulled from the sky. He dismounted with one swift motion, his face half hidden beneath the storm. "You had your chance to walk away," he said, his voice rough as stone. "I'm not walking anymore," Callum answered. Tahu's hand went to his knife, but Callum didn't raise the rifle. Instead, he dropped it into the mud. The gesture stopped the world for a heartbeat. "This isn't about weapons," Callum said. "It's about choice. Hers." Kiona stepped forward, her voice steady despite the wind. "My choice was made the day I found him. You think strength is in the arm that strikes, but real strength is in the heart that endures." Tahu's eyes flickered, the stormlight reflecting his confusion, his fury. He lunged forward, shoving Callum back into the mud. The world narrowed to the sound of rain and the thud of fists against flesh. Callum didn't fight to win. He fought to stand, to stay. Kiona shouted his name, her voice cutting through the chaos. For a moment, time stretched thin, Callum's hands gripping the earth. Tahu's breath heavy above him. The taste of rain and blood on his lips. Then, suddenly, Tahu froze. His knife hovered inches from Callum's throat. "Do it," Callum rasped. "End it, if that's what it takes." But Kiona's voice came again, soft, pleading. "Enough." And somehow, against the roar of the storm, he heard her. Tahu's hand trembled, then fell. He turned, his fury breaking into something else, not defeat, but shame. "This isn't over," he said again, but the words sounded hollow now. He mounted his horse and rode off into the storm, swallowed by the rain. Kiona knelt beside Callum, her hands trembling as she touched his face. The firelight from the cabin flickered weakly through the rain. "You didn't have to fight him," she whispered. "I wasn't fighting him," Callum said, his voice raw. "I was fighting the man I used to be." And as the storm broke, washing the valley clean, she leaned close, her forehead against his. "Then maybe now," she said, "we can start again." But even as she spoke, Callum's eyes drifted to the ridge, where, through the thinning rain, another figure stood watching. Not Tahu, someone else. Someone unseen until now. The storm passed by dawn, leaving the valley wrapped in mist. The earth still trembled under the weight of the rain, and the sky hung low, pale, and bruised. Callum sat by the door of his cabin, arms resting on his knees, eyes lost somewhere beyond the fog. The world was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This silence carried something alive, something that breathed between the drops of water clinging to every leaf and blade of grass. Kiona moved slowly through the field, her blanket trailing behind her, soaked and heavy. She stopped where the sprouts had begun to break through the soil. Many were bent, some torn away by the storm, but others stood tall, trembling in the morning light. She smiled faintly. "They survived," she whispered. Callum joined her, his steps slow but steady. So did we. They stood side by side, watching the land come back to life. The smell of wet soil filled the air, rich and clean. It reminded Callum of beginnings of the first time he came to this valley. Broken and hollow, searching for a place that wouldn't ask anything of him. But now, for the first time, he realized something. The land had never wanted his silence. It wanted his presence, his will to grow again. Kiona knelt, touching the ground with reverence. "My people will come looking for me," she said softly. "When they do, they'll ask why I stayed." He looked at her. "What will you tell them?" She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the soft gray of the dawn. "That I found something worth staying for, something they may not understand yet." He wanted to speak, but before he could, the faint sound of hooves echoed again through the valley. Both turned toward the ridge. For a moment, fear flashed in her eyes, the memory of Tahu still fresh, but this was different. The rhythm was slower, heavier. Callum lifted his rifle, scanning the fog. From the haze, a rider emerged, cloaked, silent, carrying no banner. The horse stopped several yards away. The rider didn't move. Kiona stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you?" The figure raised its head slightly, revealing a weathered face lined with age, an elder from her tribe. His eyes held no anger, only wariness. "You've changed the balance," he said. His voice carried through the mist like the echo of an old prayer. And balance always demands something in return. Kyona's breath caught. "What do you mean?" But the elder said nothing more. He turned his horse, vanishing into the fog as quickly as he had appeared. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Callum looked at Kiona, his expression darkening. "He wasn't here for you," he said quietly. "He was here for me." Kiona frowned. "Why would they?"